So we'll get started. I want to thank everyone for coming on, especially the parents. That's really great that you're tuning in to see the kids. That's wonderful. So I just want to thank our sponsors, which is what we normally do on projections, which is the folks at Pro Photo Daily, Jeff Roberts and David Schoenhauer, and American Photography, the folks at Epson, B&H, Archive Magazine, and Photo Shelter. They all have been with us for a while and helping out in a variety of ways. So we're thankful for them very much. So tonight we have three friends and three terrific photographers presenting. And we have Kate Warren, we have Molly Peters, and we're going to start with Maggie Shannon. Maggie, it's all yours.
Awesome. Okay. Cool. Well, I just want to start off and say thank you so much, Frank, for having us and creating the space for us to share our work. It's such a special thing. And I feel like all three of us are kind of sharing ongoing projects. So it's really lovely to have this space to talk about it and share it with all of you. And I'm so excited because, you know, Molly and Kate are amazing photographers, and I'm also lucky enough to call them my friends.
Great.
But yeah, so hi, I'm Maggie Shannon. I'm a documentary photographer, documentary and portrait-based photographer based out of Los Angeles, California. I'm originally from Martha's Vineyard, and I received my MFA from the School of Visual Arts in New York City. My work aims to tell the stories of smaller communities and social rituals with the goal of lifting edge voices. And my approach is led and anchored by honesty, empathy, and curiosity. I was one of PDN's 30 for 2018, and my work has appeared in American Photo 35 and 36. My first book, Swamp Yankee, told the story of New England shark fishermen. And my latest ongoing project has me following midwives across Los Angeles as they navigate the pandemic, which is what I'm going to be talking about today.
Yeah, and Maggie, give us a little insight how that became something that intrigued you, and you know why you followed it, and how you made the inroads to be trusted to being a to photographing these stories.
Yeah, just getting into that right now. So when Los Angeles first went into lockdown, I was having a conversation with one of my good friends, Paige Swimmer, who's a practicing doula in LA. And I love our conversations because I always learn something new from her. And we're both so passionate about women's rights and women's health in particular. And so she was kind of wondering to me if there was going to be a rise in home births due to, you know, hospitals banning partners, hospitals being overrun by sick patients. And we'd even heard a few cases of mothers being separated from their newborns at birth. So this seemed like such an important story to me. And so I started kind of digging around and reaching out to midwives across the country. So I started making calls on a Monday, and people were kind of like, you know, we're not really seeing a rise. But then by that Friday, people were calling me back and saying that their phones were ringing off the hook, and like the demand was really high. And all the midwives that I talked to were really worried about this rise because, you know, it's not the best way to do a home birth is to come at it from a place of fear. The midwives told me that they really like to start out with a client right when they find out that they're pregnant, because it really is a relationship built on trust, and, you know, getting to know each other is so important. And a lot of people were reaching out like a few weeks before their due date. And again, coming from that place of fear, which puts the mothers at risk, but also puts the midwives at risk as well. But, you know, it's the possibility of going through a birth unmasked and in a familiar setting seemed to a lot of these people like the only option. So a few of the midwives that I had reached out to in LA offered to have me shadow them as they were doing home visits, which is when they go into someone's home and do a prenatal checkup and whatnot. And then also a few people were working out of birth centers, which is kind of a similar thing, but more of like, you know, a private doctor's office. So yeah, and I was able to see kind of firsthand how their practices were shifting to protect themselves, their clients, and also their own families. So here, this is a midwife, Naomi Drucker, who I loved meeting so much. She's amazing. She not only has like 4 little boys at home, but she's also taking care of her elderly mother. So this burden to her was really huge. One of the midwives that I met while working on this was Shemin Perez. So she moved her entire birth clinic out into tents in the parking lot of her birth center. And then the inside space was reserved just for labor. Shemin is one of the few midwives that takes Medi-Cal, which is California's medical assistance program. And so this move just seemed like an obvious choice to her so she could continue to care for this population. She also put in like bins full of baby clothes, diapers, masks, disinfectant, and just like left them in front of her birth center so people could grab what they needed. And I felt like that really showed what a pillar a midwife can be to a community.
Yeah, and do they get any aid from the community for masks or anything, instruments that they might need?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure. That didn't really come up. I know that Shemin in particular was working with her city to get testing kits so she could keep testing herself and her staff, but I'm not sure about other things. But that's a good question. I'm going to look into that now. Yeah, so while working on this, I learned so much about birth and just like what our bodies are capable of. Birth is so unpredictable, and these midwives really showed such strength and perseverance. Sometimes they were handling back-to-back births that went on for hours. One time I was with Shemin and I was documenting one birth and there were 2 others happening at the birth center. So yeah, it was an exhausting job for them and also the mothers too. Yeah, so I was struck by the courage of the mothers in labor as well. It was incredibly difficult not to put down my camera and offer some kind of comfort for them, like, touch a hand or, a shoulder or something. And I've never really documented anything that showed so much emotion before. So like not only pain and joy, but also, exhaustion, fear, guilt, which was heartbreaking to see. A lot of them felt guilt for not being able to do it. And then also like laughter. This was Jess Anderson's birth. This is Naomi on the left and her mother's on the right. So Jess obviously, was in pain for her birth, but between contractions, she was like joking around and petting her cats who were like so curious as to what was going on. But yeah, it was really incredible to see just that huge range.
And did a lot of these folks have it planned to have the birth this way and not be in the hospitals to start with, or just the circumstances itself lend to lead in this direction?
It was a range. I think 2 of the births that I photographed, they had already planned a home birth, but one, Taylor, she had it was because of COVID that she went with a home birth because she was worried about being like that her partner couldn't be in the room with her while she was giving birth. So yeah, I mean, obviously I was nervous for my first birth experience, but really the energy that the midwives exuded was so calming. Even if someone was like totally freaking out, they were just like calmness personified, and it was such a special place to walk into and photograph with that kind of energy going around.
But that's got to be sort of interesting that you're focusing on the midwife while these women are having babies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like that's a pretty interesting place to find your own thinking, right? Because clearly the mom is the focus, but you're I mean, like, how did you come up with that, Mag? Like, how do you separate that?
Yeah, well, I think like really, I'm kind of about to go into that because the main inspiration for this story was Country Doctor. I wanted to kind of update it for 2020 and have the midwives step in for the doctor's shoes. and showed just like, all the work that they do, the long hours, like the training that they have to do, the tools. Yeah. And I think like the births were so incredible, so incredible to witness, and the images are so special that I do feel like those women are a part of the story as well. But yeah. Yeah, so yeah, as I was saying, like, yeah, I like really drew inspiration from Country Doctor for this. I'm from a rural area, so that story had a huge impact when I first saw it. And I normally photograph in color, so this was a huge like step for me to make images in black and white. And the choice really was because things kind of felt garish in a way, like the image became about the color of the couch or her jeans or something, and less so about the emotional connection that was happening between the midwife and the person and the partner, and this like beautiful touch and care that's happening. I also love how you can't really tell what time period they're taken. Like I know some images, like I don't know what the hell that is, but it's definitely a sign of the times, whatever it may be. But yeah, I just love how you can't tell, they're kind of timeless. And I think that really hints to the timelessness of the midwife's work as well.
So before you started the project, you knew you were going to shoot black and white?
No, I didn't. No, that happened after the first shoot. Like I started kind of going through them. And out of curiosity, I started toning one in black and white, and it was like, light bulb went off for me. So I devoured books on the subject as well. All the midwives had like lots of recommendations, which was awesome. So I learned more about like the culture, the training that they go through, which is so extensive, how laws differ between states, and also how it's much more accepted in Europe, which I found super interesting. And also the history of midwifery, which has been around for forever. And reading about it was really rage-inducing to learn how much has been torn away from us as women. My husband listened to me rant many a time when I was reading a certain book, but it definitely fueled the passion for me to work on this project. There's nothing like, being pissed off about something to really, get you going for it. I also talked to my mom a lot about this, and I'm not just saying because she's watching. I'm lucky enough that my mom is a retired registered nurse and also a mom. So she has her own amazing birth stories of me and my sister. And we've never actually really talked about that before. So her sharing those stories with me, I think it brought a lot of depth to this project and a lot of understanding, just to hear how personal and lovely those stories were. And she also was like, her and my dad, who's a paramedic, like having their input on captioning was really amazing too. Like all the medical jargon, reminding me what a Doppler was, all that fun stuff. So were you saying something, Frank? So I'm not a mother myself yet, but it was incredibly important for me to, show these individual labor stories in a very unreal and unflinching way. Everything is made more difficult by a pandemic, and birth is included. But this pandemic has disproportionately affected women. And so I really wanted this project to illuminate some of that burden. I faced a number of challenges while working on this. One was, making sure I had correct PPE and keeping everybody safe. So I had a whole routine that I did: disinfecting gear, washing clothes, taking a shower. And it might seem like kind of insane now or extreme, but when I started this last March, I think it was pretty scary going out and going into people's homes and into these very small spaces, because we didn't know what this thing was. It was very unknown and terrifying because it was so unknown. So And also, how do you take an intimate photograph when you have to stand 6 feet apart from someone? That was a huge challenge. And I remember talking with an editor when I was first starting, and I was sharing some images with him. He was like, I can tell you're afraid. And it took a while for me to feel confident in my own, PPE and, my own routine that I got into, until it kind of just became a part of the process. But yeah, I remember one of the first times I was following a midwife, I remember touching a coffee table and then being like, oh my God, my hand, I have to disinfect my hand now. And then touching something else and being like, oh, I brushed something, oh no. So yeah, definitely, you're juggling a lot when you're out in the world photographing during this time. But really, I think the biggest overall challenge was how to celebrate these women and show the reality of childbirth, while also trying to make it as collaborative as possible. That was so important to me. So the midwives would connect me with clients that were interested in having me photograph their birth. They would tell a little bit about the project that I was working on. And then, they would give me their phone number, and I would try to, we would talk on the phone, and I would, ask them about their comfort level. If there was anything they did want photographed, is there anything they didn't want photographed? And then I would try to meet them in person, just to kind of see each other. We're masked, but we're still, a person talking to another person. And I think that really helped, especially I got really close with one of the mothers. She's a friend now, and that feels amazing that we met through working on this project. And she was so passionate. She would even be like, I'm on the toilet, you got to get this, and I felt that collaboration, and I think it made those images so much stronger, because it was both of us working together to tell this story. Yeah, so I also just tried to, put my own ego and everything I thought I knew about birth, because I really didn't know anything, because TV births aren't real. And just be a sponge, really try to learn as much as I could, because I do want to be a mother someday. And so having this amazing opportunity to talk to people and see how it all works, it was really quite incredible. And I remember talking to one of the student midwives who was around my age, and she's thinking about it too. And we just had this amazing conversation, oh, what are you thinking about doing? And then oh, you should try this. And oh, you need to remember to do this. And it just felt this trove of information that I didn't have access to before, opened up as the community welcomed me in.
So Maggie, you had to be drained after many of these experiences, right? I mean, emotionally, this must take an incredible toll.
Yeah, definitely. It was exhausting. And I don't usually cry while I'm editing photos, but being there for these moments, and then going through them later after the adrenaline has worn off, it's so beautiful to see a child open his eyes for the first time, and I got to be there for that. It was so magical. And I feel I keep using words like that, magical, inspirational, but it's really that's what it was. It was so cool.
And where do you go with this, Mag? I mean, are you thinking of a book? Someone's asking.
Yeah. So you guys are one step ahead of me. I have my notes, and you're dead on where I'm about to talk. It's cool. Yeah. So I would love to see this as a book. It was published in the New York Times. I worked with the parenting photo editor, Tiffany Graham, and she made an amazing edit of the work. And I also worked with the reporter, Christina Karen, who treated everyone with such respect and love. It was the dreamiest situation that could have happened, and I love the final product. But yeah, it is an ongoing project for sure. I think since we hit that year mark, I started reaching out to everybody again just to see how they're doing. And one midwife had caught COVID and then recovered and is now back to work. And another is pregnant and invited me to photograph her birth, which is so cool. I guess I'm doing something right, if she wants me there, but.
And describe, this is right in someone's home, the shot.
This is at a birth center.
Oh, it's at a birth center. Okay.
Yeah. So they have the birthing pool set up, and then there's like a bed in the room too. So yeah, move seamlessly from pool to bed.
And the young lady on the bottom right there, she's on the computer. What's her role there?
So her and her, they are student midwives. So they're training with Shaman, who's their leader, I guess you could say. But
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very long and involved process to become a midwife. Because I remember when I started, I was like, this is such beautiful work. I want to become a midwife. And then like, oh, you have to like take science classes and stuff. Whoa, okay. I'll just keep like photographing it. I'm good doing my part this way. But yeah, they're both in school. But yeah, I think someone mentioned a book. I would love to see this as a book. And maybe not just like photographs, but also something educational. Because as I said, I feel like I learned how much I didn't know about our bodies and about birth. So if I could share like that tiny little nugget of knowledge that I learned, it would be so lovely to like share that with other women. Because I feel like, there's no right way to give birth. It's such a personal decision. I don't even know if I would want a home birth. Like if you want to do a hospital birth, that's great. If you want to, do a home birth, that's awesome too. But like, I just think it should be an informed decision. And I feel like a lot of that knowledge is taken away from us. So we got to take it back. I think this was right after I touched the coffee table and was freaking out silently about having to disinfect my hand.
Maggie, would you share how you feel making this project has transformed your photographic process and practice in sort of a longer term way?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I've always worked on personal documentary projects, but what I get hired to do before this was published was a lot of portrait work. And having this come out was such, I think my passion and love for the subject really showed. And I felt like all of these pieces fell together for this. So not only was I contacting people and developing those relationships, but also like being able to work on it for months was so special. And I think it gave me this whole skill set that I have. And I'm like so ready to bring to a new project. Because having that personal connection with everyone was really what kept me going through the exhaustion you mentioned, Frank. Because it was just so amazing to be like welcomed into these homes and into the birth centers. Yeah, and I also think like it's interesting. I feel like documentary photography is changing in so many ways right now, and there's a lot of growing pains happening. But I feel like, when I was photographing the mothers, I would share a gallery of the images with them. And, I'm like, if there's any you don't want shown, just tell me. And I feel like that, wouldn't be the case for a few newspapers or magazines. So, but I think, my respect for these people is more important than, having that, the newspaper be mad at me or something. And maybe that wouldn't be the case for every story, but for this one, it felt so important because they were putting their trust in me. So, I needed to, reciprocate that in a way.
That's got to be an incredible moment to witness, my God, and to have the presence of mind to take the photograph. I mean, that's just, wow.
His little hands. It was so beautiful. This was the birth where I was crying a lot during. It was so amazing to be there. And just the dad's smile too. I think this was at like 3 a.m. And I had to shoot for the next morning too. I'm like, I gotta stay. I'll deal with that when it comes. Cross that bridge when we get to it.
And I'm sure all these families must be thrilled to have this imagery for that, for their own personal history, right? I mean, that's got to be, yeah, how wonderful for them.
Yeah, I made little prints for people too. It was so fun. Like, that's one of the joys is, being able to share and like, they were so excited about them too. Like the feedback I got was really special. But yeah, I don't know if I went under my time or not.
No, it was just perfect. In fact, Brian Tomko, I think, just put up the link to your story from the Times.
Oh, thank you. That's nice.
So that's in the chat room. That is just really beautiful work. So, top 5 stories that you've shot in your career?
Yeah, probably number 1.
That right?
He blows everything out of the water. Shark fishing with a bunch of, dudes was really fun too. That has its own special place in my heart.
No, that is really really wonderful, and I'm sure looking at your parents, they've got that smile of pride that only parents can have. That's really beautiful.
I mean,
Really
I feel
good.
like, yeah, they're both such amazing people and they help people with, my mom being a nurse, my dad being like a paramedic and firefighter. And I feel like photography is like, my way of giving back in this way. And it's so fun to be able to connect with them with all of this medical stuff too. 'Cause now, I feel like it's a fun conversation to have with them and we can bond over it and it feels really special.
Yeah, here's a question. Is there a difference between first-time moms and the ones who already had kids? Different experience?
Yeah, I think, every experience is so different. My friend Paige has insane stories of like her first doula thing, which I feel uncomfortable sharing, but just know that it's insane.
Yeah.
And her boss said that she's been working as a doula for 40 years and she's never seen anything like that. And I think that fits everything, like every birth is so different because we're all so different. But one thing I did notice is the 2 women it was their first child, they did end up being transported to the hospital. While the woman who it was her second child, her labor was a lot easier. So I don't want to give any like medical advice or anything because I am in no way qualified, but that was something I noticed. So
Yeah, everyone is in the chat room is just loving the stories and loving the images.
thank you.
That's really
so
great,
nice.
Maggie.
Thank
So,
you all.
will you continue this now? Like, what has it ended this project for you, or do you keep going? What do you do?
I'm gonna keep going. Yeah, I have Shaman is, asking her current clients if they're down for me to come to a birth. I have a few other doulas that I'm excited to start following. I think like I needed a little time away from it just for some perspective and to go through everything and find like, the voice and the story in it. But yeah, no, I'm so excited to keep working on it, especially now that like, people are getting vaccinated and it does feel safer.
And the edit that you did with the Times, how is the editing process easy for you? Difficult to give it to somebody and be comfortable with the edit? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I sent like selects. So I organized it by, birth or midwife I was following. And I trusted Tiffany to I mean, she's so talented. I love her work as an editor. And I think like, I gave her complete control over doing that. But there was one image that wasn't included. And I was like, you know what, this one's really important. And it shows this really special moment. Like, can you include this? And she was like, yeah, of course, we got to put that in. So yeah, definitely like, I think sometimes we got to push because we know the story better than anyone else for sure. So
Great. Well, Maggie, thank you so much for sharing that.
yeah, thank you.
And you're invited back, especially when you have the book. We'll have a book signing virtually, or
I love that.
so that is a standing invitation to have
Thank
you
you so
back.
much, Ray. Thanks for having me.
No, that's great. And next up is Molly Peters. So Molly, take it away.
not wanting me to unmute for a second, but thank you so much, Maggie, for sharing. It's been such a pleasure, like watching this work develop, just, you know, one-on-one and in our group chats in the crit group, and just seeing where you've taken it is really amazing. So I feel privileged to be kind of somewhat involved in that process. And thank you, Frank, for inviting us here. Probably known Frank since like 2010 or 2011 for the Palm Springs Photo Festival. And it's been really fun to sort of reconnect with him now, because obviously nothing's been in person for a while. And want to thank everyone who showed up to learn more about our work. I feel like, at least for me, one of the bright spots of the last year has been all the opportunities that have come up to attend things like this virtually that you may not otherwise be able to travel to in person. So to give really quick background on myself and my work, I'm a fine art and documentary photographer whose work primarily deals with spirituality, memory, and human connection to the natural world. I was born and raised on Martha's Vineyard and have been based in LA for the past 7 years. My undergrad degree is from Bard College in photography and Italian studies, and in 2018, I received an MFA in photography from the Hartford Art School. What is it called? The project I'm sharing today is a relatively wide edit from a work in progress, a personal project titled Landfall, which was first shown at the UCR Museum of Photography's exhibition Art in the Plague Year, alongside Kate and many other talented artists. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it. It's online. The term landfall references the moment when a tropical storm intersects with coastline. So in this case, where personal and global changes converge. I actually have 2 other bodies of work in progress, one of which is on hold indefinitely due to COVID, both of which focus on Indigenous communities, specifically activists fighting to protect their sacred land from desecration through construction and destructive mining. I had just returned from a trip for one of those projects, following 6 months of near nonstop travel when LA went into the first lockdown. So my work tends to develop organically and intuitively, as opposed to being an execution of a preconceived idea. Landfall in particular is a perfect example of that, since I'd originally considered it as roughly 3 separate segments. There were images I was making in the general Los Angeles area during quarantine, photographs from a month I spent at home on Martha's Vineyard last fall, and images from a 2-week road trip I took this past January through the southwestern states. And it was only more recently that I recognized the same emotional thread throughout all the work and began experimenting with combining the bodies into one. I didn't want to make work overtly about COVID, though of course the collective trauma of the past year would inevitably seep into anything I created. I tend to be more interested in work that's subtle and allows viewers to bring their own experiences and feelings to it instead of dictating to them how they should feel or what they should think. While I was at home last fall, I was quarantining in my grandmother's home following her passing over the summer. Due to COVID, there was no memorial planned, but her death was an impetus behind my decision to go home. I made sure I could quarantine in her empty house, which is down a 3-mile dirt road and surrounded by water on 3 sides. I grew up there, and now that she's gone, it's somewhat uncertain whether and for how long we might keep the house in the family. I left the property fewer than 10 times in the entire month. Though I was working from there, it was the first moment of relaxation I'd had in recent memory. I'd left a California that was choking under a vast blanket of wildfire smoke and record-breaking heat waves. Suddenly, I was able to breathe, wander outdoors, and see a few friends and relatives at a distance. Being there felt like home, of course, but simultaneously profoundly different. Familiar scenes had been imbued with weight, carrying feelings of nostalgia as I reflected on remnants of what life used to look like, now embodying a mystery of an uncertain future. I've always used road trips to mark turning points in my life, and this year was no exception. As the country transitioned from one administration to another, I hit the road for 2 weeks surrounding the inauguration to take the emotional temperature of the Southwest. I take all possible safety precautions on these trips, from sleeping in the car whenever I can, to bringing nearly all my food with me from home. In the end, it's always been worth it for the sanity that a change of scenery can bring. I had no expectations before the trip. How could I possibly guess what other places would look like at that point, 9 months into a pandemic? It was the second time I left California since the first lockdown, though I've done multiple cross-country road trips in years past, as well as many others that circled through other routes. I've always found driving to be very meditative, particularly in remote areas, and this trip was no different. The time and space allow me to get away from the noise and obligations of the city and just focus on what I'm feeling and seeing. Found much of what I saw to be worn down, seemingly exhausted, as though the tumult and stress of the last year was just too much to handle. For me, the overarching theme of the last year has been solitude. I've lived and traveled alone for many years by choice, but being forced to forego even small human interactions due to fear of infection takes a toll on even the most independent people. I've been drawn to scenes and objects that reflect that feeling. Even on the admittedly rare occasions when I photograph people, they're in their own mind space and appear solitary. The work I made in Los Angeles was mostly spurred by the Journal, which, if you aren't familiar with it, is a collective of over 400 women photographers worldwide who are documenting their lives during the pandemic. Kate and Maggie are also members, and the collective shares work primarily through Instagram, but there have been a number of international exhibitions, and there are more in the works at the moment. And this project sort of created a new community while we were all isolated. And through it, I've made creative connections with friends in Central America, South America, Europe, and beyond. So going forward, now that the vaccine is more widely available, I'm looking forward to planning upcoming options for travel to continue exploring and developing the body of work. And I'm very excited to see how it develops. Thank you for letting me share it.
Molly, I didn't want to interrupt you. So like these beautiful moments that you capture, I mean, and a number of us love the shot with the door, and the chair behind the screen door and the chair behind it. You love that image. So you're on this journey, and I have to say the way you speak about it is like you really take us with you.
Thanks.
You really do put us in that place that you feel what you're feeling, which is really a very, very rare thing to be able to do. That we keep on flipping through them again.
You know, that's Maggie, by the way.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. In Malibu, when we were trying to escape wildfire smoke, and even out there it was smoky.
No, everyone is just.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Frank.
Yeah. So where do you go, Molly? Like, does this end, or is this just one of those pieces of a career that signifies? And that's the interesting thing. It doesn't signify COVID at all, right? I mean, it signifies this beautiful journey that you're on, right, and reflecting on.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I was saying, like my bodies of work develop organically, and I usually just sort of know when they're over, when the work shifts. So the pictures that I'm making don't fit with the others, and then it's something new.
So the shifting is the content.
Shift could be content, shift could be aesthetics and form, shift could be like emotional quality. I think there's different ways that it has manifested over the years. But yeah, usually I just know. I know that's probably an unsatisfactory answer, but
No, it's in your heart, it's in your soul, right? You don't know.
And I mean, even things like this, my grandmother's ashes on the mantle after my uncle brought them up from New Jersey, and some flowers on the left are real, the flowers on the right are fake. And Dad, do you know whose throwing knife that is? Because I don't know.
That's mine, but I haven't thrown it yet.
Okay, can I be there?
You can. I might let you throw it first.
Okay.
As long as no one catches it.
So yeah, I mean, it could be like these everyday moments of, I was making chicken soup because I knew that I would have limited opportunities to go into town, and my dad had been generous enough to put groceries in the fridge when I got there, so I didn't have to shop and endanger people, myself or others. So I was trying to focus on things that would be fairly simple to make and would last a while.
So
Uh,
a shot like this, like you're doing that, right? Like you're cutting the onion. Is it all of a sudden the way the light is streaming in, or is it a moment in your mind and in your heart that this is sort of a really nice quiet moment that I'm having making chicken soup? Like what drives like in particular an image like this for you?
I mean, the light's what catches my eye, no question. But I definitely make sort of mundane everyday images. Not mundane images, but images of the mundane. And so I guess it's not surprising that I would photograph vegetable scraps on the counter, but this one was definitely because of the light, and then also just, memories of my grandmother cooking in this kitchen, and I was living in her house, and so just the daily routines definitely were sort of carried a different weight.
Right. So is this project over, or where are we? Or do you know?
I think it's ongoing. I am figuring out plans to travel in the coming weeks, months, and the work that I make will kind of dictate if it fits or if it's something else. Um,
And do you see this as a book? Do you see, where do you see this going?
so I definitely work in book form. My graduate program had a huge emphasis on the photo book. We had history of photo book classes, and would meet with binders and designers and everything, as well as doing artist visits. So I do feel that this would have form as a book. I haven't started actually playing with it yet,
Mm.
but
And
that
do
would
you have help?
probably be the result.
Yeah. And do you have help, or do you seek opinions as far as your edits and things like that? How does that work for you?
Most of it is myself intuitively. Maggie and Kate and I have a fairly active group text that is a lot of screenshots of different edits and which one and put it where. And so I really appreciate their input for that. And, it was actually a conversation with an editor at the New York Times who was first suggesting to intersperse the road trip with the work from the rest of the year. And we had a fantastic conversation, and after that I started to play with it, and and then talk to a few trusted people. Okay, do these feel do they feel different? Do they fit? How does it feel? Is it distracting, or is it just me knowing that they're different locations? And the general feedback was that it was cohesive, and the more time that I've spent with it, I think it works. So it's a work in progress. This is the form that it is taking right now. This is it's a slightly wider edit than I usually show in like a meeting or a portfolio review or anything like that. But I figured in this setting, I would rather, I know you're interested in sort of the background behind the process and, all of that. So I figured,
Everybody is.
why not show a little bit more?
It's a gift to us.
I think also, I mean, there's always callbacks and themes. I've made work on the island my entire life. The guns and cigarettes. I mean, I had a bullet shell collection when I was in first grade. It was in a Stride Right box, and it said in like very, very shaky little kid handwriting, Molly's bullet shells. I still have it. And in my undergrad thesis work, I had a photo of a giant lobster pot that was rusted and riddled with bullet holes that was also a relic of my uncle's. And so, I don't really show that work anymore. It's 12 years old. But I still know, when I see this picture, it calls back to that. So there's similarities, there's sort of threads that connect, but they're still distinct bodies, I would say.
Somebody wrote in the chat room, such a beautiful way to honor your grandmother by taking photographs that were familiar to her. That's really nice.
Thank you.
Muy
Yeah,
bien.
any time that I'm able to spend there is really special, especially since I live on the other side of the country now.
Right.
And pandemic doesn't make travel easy, but I'm
So that'll be an interesting thing if your family decides to move on from the home there, how that will make these images of having even more importance,
for sure.
or if you keep it, right?
Yeah, and I think,
Is this the home, the front?
no, that's around the corner from my apartment.
Okay.
There you go. That's no, hers is the only house for Miles. But I loved this because, I see faces and things a lot, like clouds and trees and shadows, and this is, monsters coming out of the shadows.
Yeah.
And I think probably the best other example of that would be, how often is there an actual like serpent in the sky?
Yeah.
You see his eye?
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, no, I mean, it's any time that I get to spend there is special for sure.
Great.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, you also have, of course, have an invitation to come back and show us the
Thank you.
journey. I mean, it's really, really beautiful. And like I say, your words really bring the whole thing together for any viewer. So thank you so much, Mom.
Thanks, Frank. And I appreciate you letting me bring my friends along for the talk.
No, that's it happened so quickly, right? We just got on the phone.
Perfect.
Yeah, we did a crazy thing, Molly and I. We got on the phone and talked, and that was it. It was great. Really, really nice. So next up, we have Kate Warren.
Hang on.
So we are going to let her
Oh,
take
shit.
over. Thank you, Molly, very, very much.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, everyone.
Check out the chat room.
Okay.
It's all you, Kate.
Kate, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yep, now we can.
Wonderful.
That's
Thanks,
one of the
everybody.
projections for the song.
Hello. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Frank, for having us, and Maggie and Molly for sharing your beautiful work. I am so grateful to be able to be in community with the two of you. As Molly mentioned, we have a really active group chat, and that level of day-to-day support from I know my practice and has meant so much, because as photographers, and I'm sure lots of people on this call know, we work oftentimes alone and in isolation, even when it's not COVID. And so to be able to be making work, particularly that's so personal, and to have people who know us and know our hearts, and with whom we are in constant sort of creative dialogue, to be able to bounce ideas off of, really means a lot. And so to watch how your work has evolved over the past year as our friendships have deepened, and to be able to share my work with you, as I have made what is certainly the most personal work of my career, has been such an honor. So thank you both for holding so much space.
And the thing that's really important for us and all the viewers is that you guys are open to share it. That's really the gift. That really is a gift for all of us. So you're on, Kate. Sorry.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. Yeah, so my name is Kate Warren, and I am a professional editorial and commercial photographer. I've been a freelance photographer for 9 years, splitting my time first in Washington, D.C., and then I moved to Los Angeles in 2019, which is where I met Maggie and Molly. I have worked with clients like the New York Times and the Washington Post and Vanity Fair and Planned Parenthood. But as with many photographers, I'm lucky enough to have my practice be rooted in personal work. And so when the pandemic hit, and I lost all of my client work, as all photographers did. It really caused me to pause and to think about how I was making work and what work felt most meaningful, and what felt most connected to who I am as a person. And so during pandemic, I was quarantined, unfortunately, apart from my partner across the country, because I'd been working bi-coastally, and so he was living in our Washington DC apartment, and I was living in our Los Angeles house. And so I was quarantined alone for 6 months, which, as Molly mentioned, takes quite a toll. And so I developed a new way of working during that time that felt radically personal. And after 6 months, I decided that I needed to make a change. And so I found a beautiful 3-bedroom cottage in the Green Mountains of Vermont. This is the view from my house. And so my partner and I moved here in September. This is actually what it looks like outside right now. I wanted to share with all of you what my view looks like from where I'm sitting now. And so that is actually identical to what I'm seeing just beyond my computer. We're about 10 feet from the edge of the water, because I want all of you to feel sort of brought into this very sort of insular world that we're living in here in the mountains. And so I actually grew up about 20 minutes from where we are currently living. And the land here is very important to who I am as a person. And I found that when I came back here, it was strongly informing the work that I was making in a couple of different ways. And so I wanted to treat this as a self-imposed artist residency with this level of isolation. And I really am able to sort of hear my own voice and stay connected to my practice without being pulled into the kinds of pictures I should be making for other people. And that felt like such a blessing in disguise with the pandemic. And so I moved back not only to have the self-imposed artist residency, but because my mother was going blind. Her retina detached last May. And after 4 failed surgeries, it was determined that she would not regain vision in her left eye. And so I came back to provide emotional and daughterly support, and help her sort of process and grieve the trauma of losing her sight, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, as a photographer, is a lot emotionally to be faced with the loss of sight. And so I created this project, Loss of Central Vision, that is set within that context. And when I moved back, I started experimenting with finding new ways of working. And it was rooted initially in how to support my mother. And so when I came back, I learned to cyanotype print. And cyanotype printing is a photographic process from the 1800s where you chemically treat paper or fabric or wood, and it makes the surface light sensitive. And then you can lay, in this case, plants on it and put it in the sun, and it transforms the surface, and then you rinse it with water to fix it, and it always is this vibrant blue color. And so my plan was to bring together my mother's medium of quilting, which she taught me when we were growing up, and she learned from her mother and her mother before that, and my medium of photography, using cyanotype printing. So I wanted to make a cyanotype quilt, but I had very limited time because the seasons in Vermont are quite extreme. And so I moved back at the beginning of September, and usually the hard frost comes within 6 weeks of that. So I had 6 weeks to learn to cyanotype print as well as possible, and make a whole body of photographic work on paper, and then use those skills to make fabric that I would then use to make this quilt, which you can see here. And so it was fast, and I was spending a lot of time outside, and I was foraging and collecting plants from the forest where I played when I was growing up with my mother's help. And then she and I together dyed the fabrics. And it was this really amazing, very connected process of making things with our hands and getting out in the world when she had been bedridden for months before that, and it became this artistic ritual that we performed together, not only as sort of an extension of the maternal legacy of quilt making within our family, but a way of us sort of healing, sticking points within our own relationship, because I hadn't lived close to my family since I was 18, and I'm 32. And so it was a really amazing opportunity for us to sort of redefine our relationship. So I made these cyanotypes, and I'm making the quilt. And in addition, I'm going out in the world and making pictures. And I'm doing this often with friends. So I made friends with 2 local photographers here in Vermont, Dan Carden and Macaulay Lerman. And we would say, okay, we're going to pick this small town, and we would drive there, and we'd say, okay, see you later. And we would go separate ways for a couple of hours, and we would make pictures and studies of the place and the people, and the really like local color, lots of local color. And it was a way for me to redefine my relationship with the place where I grew up, because oftentimes we were going to places I had never been to before. So it became this expansive ritual where we'd go out at the same day every week. And it was very grounding for my practice. And so I made many of the pictures for this project through that process. And it was really an amazing way to expand my knowledge of Vermont as well. And in this case, this picture was visiting a friend from high school who's now living off the grid, homesteading in the Northeast Kingdom up near Canada with no running water or electricity, and happy as a clam. So I went and stayed up on their homestead, and to see these other ways of living really sort of hit the reset button on how I'd been living in Los Angeles. It was a transformative process. And then there were parts of my practice from LA that I kept. So I developed a strong self-portrait practice. And so this is a self-portrait that I made shortly after arriving in Vermont as well. And then the pictures that I was making in the landscape here were very connected to nature, and sort of recognizing the sacred object quality of the things that were happening in the natural world around me. So set within that framework, I was spending all this time with my family. And in the context of COVID, grief was really rising to the surface. Obviously, we're going through sort of a collective grieving of our change of way of life, and lost loved ones, and dreams that are no longer going to come to fruition the way we thought they would. And so I was really reflecting on how grief was manifesting in my family, and that was calling me to engage with archival materials. So Loss of Central Vision became a project that included still photographs, archival material, writing, and quilting. So I'll take you through some of that work. This is my father on the right with his sisters Beverly and Nancy. We called them the girls. I inherited my aunt's bedroom furniture, heard their laughter echo as I played with their toys. Do all children play with ghosts? I saw them through the fear in my father's eyes as he taught me to drive. Girls ride guardrail to death. The auto that carried 2 Massachusetts girls to their death yesterday on the state thruway was guided to the bridge abutment by a guardrail, state police said. Trooper Eugene Mack said the car climbed the rail and rode it for about 30 feet and then shot into the air and struck the bridge. So in June of 1970, my aunts, Nancy and Beverly, who were 11 and 17 years old, were killed in a tragic car accident. My dad was 19 and he had recently moved away from home for the first time. Obviously, this loss devastated the family. And it's a loss that we rarely spoke about in my family. Growing up, there were no pictures of the girls in our house. We didn't refer to them by name. We only called them the girls because it was easier. It hurt my dad too much not to, and I understood. But I wanted to also I felt the loss of the relationship as well. I spent time imagining what kind of aunts they would have been or the lives they would have lived, and it made me sad. And so Loss of Central Vision seeks to bridge that gap and help me build my connection with my aunts. As part of the process of making this work, I dove deeply into the family archives. And while doing that, I found this pocket notebook that at first I thought belonged to my grandmother. It detailed mileage and daily expenses. You know, a gallon of milk is 50 cents from the early 1970s. But at closer reading, I came to understand that the notebook belonged to my grandfather. And it detailed not only the mileage and the expenses, but daily missives of his grief. Because at the end of every transmission, he would say things like, "Sure, Miss Bev and Nancy, I get so lonely for them." It is very simple, straightforward language. You know, in this previous paragraph, he's talking about a pot roast that my dad really liked, right? So this like daily ritual of grieving that we don't often see publicly because there's so much shame around it, especially I think with men. And this loss was particularly hard on my grandfather, who was a soft man who owned the local hardware store, Warren Hardware, and played the trumpet in a big band in the 1940s. And so I've made pictures in our local hardware stores here. And he never processed the grief, and what ultimately happened was that he died of a broken heart. He had a sudden heart attack at 57 within 3 years of the girls dying. And so within a 3-year period, my father lost almost his whole family, which is heartbreaking. I can't even begin to fathom the weight of that loss. And so my Aunt Nancy and Aunt Beverly appear in my dreams and in the dreams of my partner. And they're always holding hands. And when I've worked with mediums, they always see them holding hands. And it's which is super interesting, obviously. And because for me, I like to think about not only what's lost, but what's still present, right? Like I personally believe that when we pass, we just go to the other side of the veil, right? But you're still able to have a presence if you want it. And people stay here in this world for a variety of reasons. The girls had clearly passed on, and I've worked with people who couldn't get in touch with them. But when I started doing this project, they started visiting my partner in particular on a regular basis. They were like very interested in being actively involved in the making of this work, which is super interesting to me. And so, I think about like how do you navigate consent with somebody who's passed? How do you have agency when you don't have a body? Which are wild questions to be asking, for sure. But spirituality is really important to my practice. And so I want to sort of be thinking about these things as I'm making the work.
Yeah, Kate, I hesitate to interrupt you because the story is so compelling. Was there ever a point where you thought, I'm going too far? Or do I want to continue? Is this too pain? You were always all in.
Yeah, I mean, the only way out is through.
Yeah.
And sort of the purpose of this project and projects like this is to heal ultimately, right?
And why now?
The things that we don't talk about, and I was just going to speak to this, like, thinking about, as I'm making this project, thinking about what happens after a loss like that. Like, what's left? What kind of void exists? How do you then fill that void? What does the process of healing look like? How does shame show up, right? I was raised Catholic, and oftentimes people are religious, and so they ask questions like, why would God do this? What did I do to deserve this? And to me, it's not my role to answer that question, but to acknowledge that that's a question that's commonly asked. So this picture says confessional, no face-to-face confession, please, which I think really speaks to our culture that tells us to hide, no face-to-face, right? Like, be private in your grief, be private in your suffering. And I think, yes, obviously it's radically emotional for me to be making this work and to be sharing it, but it's healing to do so too, to bring it out into the light. Because when we don't, it can take over. It takes over who we are, and it subsumes who we can become. And everybody processes this kind of thing differently, obviously, and there's no wrong way to process intergenerational trauma or grief. Everyone has their own way. Finding peace in your own way, I think, is important. This is a model boat that belongs to my father, and his father had a boat, and my dad has a boat, and the name of the boat is War and Peace. And that is his happy place. That is where he goes to find peace. And so he has these rituals and practices that like offer him peace through this. My connection to my partner, who's pictured here, is part of how I find peace. You know, relying on loved ones, being vulnerable, sharing these kinds of stories, I think is incredibly important for me personally. You know, and to answer the second part of your question, Frank, like making this work was radically difficult. And so having the support of my partner has been absolutely so important as I go through the process of understanding what all of this means to my family, to my father, to my dad.
And what's the time period of this in a body of work?
Yeah, so I've made this body of work since September.
Wow.
So it's early. It feels quite early for me. It needs time. So this is the lake on which I'm living. I found it to be very healing and peaceful to live here. So there's a bit more writing. This piece is birthright. Grief runs in one side of my family, blindness in the other. My mother's father grew bitter as he lost his sight, computer screen eyes glowing. The scientist wrote books he could never read. At twilight on the Kanama Trail, he refused to see his children, even when he couldn't. Grandma's vision went not long after, dimmed the light she used to write about a Chicago house full of women in the 1930s. I make pictures from her poems and poems from her pictures. My mother and I quilt to feel immortal. Our fingers bleed onto the fabric from countless pinpricks. Half blind herself, her mother's unfinished quilt sits between us, soft as time. One day she will go blind like her father. So will I. So the other piece of this, obviously, is not only reflecting on the grieving of the loss in my father's family years ago, but the grief of my mother losing her sight now, and the potential loss of my sight as well. And so, because my mother has the genetic markers for macular degeneration, which her father suffered from, which is the leading cause of blindness in adults. And so it is highly likely that I too will go blind one day. And so as a photographer, I'd have to sit with and reckon with what it means to see, what it means to make images, and what my process is around that. So I'm trying, it behooves me to embrace that difficulty so that I can build a process of making images while I have sight that I can use once I don't. So it's sort of in the back of my mind through all of this. And here's some images of sort of maternal legacy that's important to me. This is the quilt that my grandmother started before she lost her vision. My mom is now finishing it. And there is fabric in my grandmother's quilt that is also in my quilt, which you can see here. It's huge. I'm going to be quilting this thing by hand for a year. And moving back to my hometown, which is known for the round church, is also an opportunity for reckoning. That, you know, everyone has sort of a conflicted relationship with the place where they grew up, and being able to live back here as an adult, especially during COVID, has been an opportunity for redemption. And so as I think about blindness and grief and sort of how blindness is a form of grief and how these things intersect, these archival images really sort of stick with me. This is the church where my great-grandmother got married in Chicago. And I photographed the negative, which has degraded with these orbs in place, which I think is really interesting because in spiritual photography, oftentimes orbs represent the spirit. And so as I think about how soft time is between the generations and how to depict my relationship to my maternal legacy, this is an interesting thread. And it's overwhelming, right? Like all of this is a lot. And I feel grateful to have the time and emotional support to think about, one day I will not be able to see the sunlight on this doorknob. One day I will not be able to see this rainbow across the lake from my house. One
Kate,
day I will not be able. Mm-hmm.
tell us about your partner.
Yeah, he's amazing. I'm so lucky. We met living in Washington, D.C., and he has an amazing creative spirit as well, and is just so grounding. And he's here on the call listening. So thank you, sweetheart, for being there for me. And he talks through all of this. He's my first editor. He helps me figure out how to structure this talk, because none of this project was not structured to be orally conveyed yet, since it's very much in progress. And he's helped me process all of the feelings that come with making this kind of work. So I certainly couldn't do it without his support.
Yeah, he must be a special guy.
I'm very lucky. He really is. So, I think it's important to have these kinds of conversations, because when we don't, our grief can go unchecked and can go in directions and become things that we can't control or don't intend. So one final written piece to share as we come to the end here. This is the Gray Veil legacy. Memories lay stacked in the basement, arranged in rows behind closed doors. You dated each in sprawling cursive, snapshots tracking years as they slipped by. Fireworks explode as we blink, white light fading to a cacophony of color at dusk. Orbs of our ancestors float by, observing the gifts they suffered before passing on. A gray veil cloaks our vision, not pitch black, not yet, but gray, light filtering through a curtain as we learn to move through shadows. The things we hope will help weigh heavy on scar tissue. We may be doing more harm than good, so we try and try. We can't talk about it now. The journey we're traveling is close. I don't know if one day the gray will fade to black. And so to write this piece, I interviewed my mother about her experience of losing her sight, and then took what she shared, oftentimes with, verbatim sort of fragments, and wrote this, because this is how she describes her sight to be now. And so as I think about the continuation of the project, I think about how to make pictures that approximate what she sees, approximate what it means to lose your sight. And because it's a spectacular process, and there's still so much they don't know about vision and how the eye works. And so I look forward to doing that, and look forward to making more imagery while sight restricted myself, to better relate, and to continue sort of animating my aunts and bringing them into this process, and collaborating more closely with my parents as well. And that's it.
That is just what a powerful story, my God. To share that so eloquently is a gift. One thing to tell everybody, tell all of your colleagues that each one of these chats are going to be on the projections.live site. So if they've missed it, you have to force them to go see it. So the three of these chats will be on projections, within a few days. But so does it continue now, Kate, for you? Like where do you go?
Oh yeah, I'm attending a MFA in art photography program at Syracuse University, studying under Doug Dubois, to continue the work for the next 3 years in a designated academic setting.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
yep.
And the three of you, I know and I have to say, like, nobody has left. and there's always people. I mean, the three of you really have created such an incredible evening for all of us. I mean, you just look through the chat room. I mean, everyone is just humbled. And Kate, to share all those interesting stories and sentiment and the fear that you're living with, and the grief. I mean, that's so heartwarming to allow us in. That's
Thank you for having me and holding the space.
and I really have to thank Molly. I mean, like I said, Molly said, I've got two friends that I think we could do it together. And and another thing, I haven't done this ever before, but this is an annual now. In what month? We're in April. Every April, you three will be doing projections. Put it in your book. You tell me the date, but you guys have to come back. I mean, we want to see, more of these stories. They're just phenomenal, really. I mean, everyone is humbled by it. And really,
Thanks, everybody.
I'm absolutely speechless. It's beautiful work. It's yeah. If anyone has
you.
questions, please. I'm not usually tongue-tied. Everyone will tell you that. But yeah, this is
Yeah, somebody, I'm going through the chat. Someone asked how you find mediums that you can trust to work with. It's interesting. So both Maggie and I have done work in the witch community. I did a long-term project on witchcraft for the Washington Post magazine, and so I have quite a bit of experience in those communities and with folks who work in those spaces professionally. I mean, at this point now, I'm like, well, I can tell if someone knows what they're talking about. But there are certainly ways to sort of discern how talented someone is and how experienced they are. And there are a couple of different approaches. So to think through sort of like what kind of experience you want to have. Some people work with pendulums. Some people like channel the voices of the people that you're communicating with directly and are just a channel themselves. There are lots of different approaches. So if you have questions or you're interested in connecting with people who do this kind of work, please feel free to message me. I'll put my email in the chat, or you can find me on Instagram, and I'm happy to help with that because it is tricky. But generally,
did you always believe, Kate? Did you?
Oh no, I mean, I was raised Catholic, which is obviously like quite a mystical religious tradition. But doing that project on witchcraft was transformative. Saw things that you can't unsee, and it felt quite natural too. At least for me, it's not like a thing that if it didn't feel like learning something new, it felt like remembering.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, because you look at how little kids interact with this kind of thing, right? They're like, "Mommy, who's the old man in the front yard?" There's no one there, right? Like we're not taught these kinds of languages. But I know Molly and Maggie and I all sort of are sensitive to this kind of stuff, and I'm lucky enough that my partner is as well. So when like my dead aunts visit his dreams, he knows how to communicate with them and then talk to me about it, which is super lucky because that's not my skill set. So different people have different skill sets. So I'm really grateful to sort of have those people around.
Yeah, that is just because I have to say, I mean, I'm Catholic, but that's not part of it. I cannot get to the idea of believing. But then I know, a few people who really are all in and they have these kinds of moments, and that your partner has moments that are about your family is.
I'm very grateful.
Man.
He's like the most adjacent open channel, basically.
Beautiful. Well,
because it's not my thing. My dream space is real dense. So he's definitely the easiest way to sort of get to me, which is nice.
Well, yes. So I thank everyone for staying with us, and I thank the three of you for doing such a great job. Molly for really putting this together. Maggie and Kate for sharing these really beautiful, intimate stories with us has just been a real gift. One of the real highlights of 5 years of doing this. a really special night. I can't thank you enough. And please tell everyone to come to projections.live and see these recordings. We just witnessed magic tonight. I mean, that was really great. So we can open up all the microphones, Jay, and if anyone has comments or questions, fire away to the ladies, or if you're dropping off, enjoy the rest of your night.
Hey, Molly, I got a quick question. That photo that you have of the yogurt store, where was that? Because that looks really familiar to me.
It's in Silver City, New Mexico.
Okay, never mind. Not where I thought it was. Never mind.
Okay, great. Yeah. Everyone just loves. Yeah, Louisa put me to the test. I just witnessed magic, and you still don't believe, man. I got to come around. I have to come around. But yeah. So
Question?
Thank you for giving us the space. Oh, sorry.
Thanks.
Hey, Mom? What, Molly?
Oh, I was just saying thank you for giving us the space, but I think somebody was also trying to speak.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, Kate, with your work, I thought it looked like most of the images you showed were vertical. Is that like portrait format? Is there a reason behind that?
I tend to be really drawn to that format. I think, in speaking to in acknowledging your observation that it's portrait format, I think that tracks with the idea that everything is a portrait or has the ability to be a portrait. And so working in that vertical format sort of indulges that sense of animism, right? So like, even if it's a picture of a cute mushroom, like that has a whole personality. And if it's shot as a vertical, it sort of, it contributes to that sense of life.
Yeah, it's very, I get it now. It's like very anthropomorphic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Giving it that sense. It's a portrait. Yeah, it's cool.
Hey,
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
This is Linda Seaton. I'm an art historian. I'm one of Molly's former professors. And I think that perhaps the verticality also altered piece format. And I mean, that's what it is. In art history, we think of vertical compositions as iconic, a way to communicate, or as machines really to communicate with the divine, while a horizontal image tends to be more narrative. So I think subconsciously, perhaps your Catholic training has been transformed in your work to another spiritual realm.
Thank you. I love that. And I'm totally adopting it because it is on point. Thanks for that.
Always new insights.
You're welcome.
I'm so grateful that one of my undergrad professors still would show up to something like this. So thank you for coming.
You're very welcome. I would not miss it.
No, that's great.
We're always learning.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Hey,
So-
Frank, that was, it's Glenn. Thanks
Hey,
again. This is one of the best projections I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's Glenn Backen, a creative director at a big ad agency in New York. Thanks, Glenn. It's great to see you. And that was spectacular.
Terrific. I think the thing I'd wanted to add, Frank, is all three women whose work I'm not familiar with until tonight. The stories that accompany it, bring so much strength to the images. Everyone kind of knows that, but not always though. That isn't always the case. And you pointed that out a few times, that how well spoken all three women are. Especially at the end, Kate, I was so lulled into the storytelling. I was drifting in and out of the images because of just your style specifically. It was just absolutely wonderful. And I almost wish that when your work is shown, all three of you, but especially that, you, Kate, at the end, I wish your voice can accompany the images, and I think I wrote that in the chat, that makes this stuff so much stronger. I mean, all three of you were just, absolutely perfect. But so congratulations to all three of you as friends and as artists.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Glenn. That's so kind.
Yeah, and like I said, we have you guys booked because you're going to get all these calls now. Everyone wants you guys to speak and this and that, and you won't talk to us. Want your big deals and all this other stuff. But we have you for April for sure. No, that's
There's one question in the chat for Kate, asking about your process and how you decided to include text with imagery. And I think that's really integral to your work. So if you don't mind sticking around for a minute, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, Dana. My grandmother was a writer, and she was an English teacher for many, many years. But she wrote poetry and was published and belonged to a poetry community. And she taught me to write starting when I was 6. And so writing is the foundation for my entire creative practice. And it's traditionally been a private part of my practice, but particularly for this body of work, it's so rooted in maternal legacy. It felt important to bring not only the quilting and my photographic process to the table, but the writing as well. And there are components in the poems that I shared that reference her poems as well, and subjects that she covered or imagery that she felt drawn to, and my writing style is certainly informed by hers. So my decision to include text is an homage to my grandmother.
Great. Any other questions? Any other issues? I see Juliet Wolf there from.
Hi, Juliet. Thanks for coming.
I got one for Kate real quick. In thinking about the sort of generational divide between your grandmother, your mother, and potentially you going blind, it occurred to me when you were talking about it, how differently each generation must have prepared or like just come to terms with going blind. And I'm still trying to like sort of get my head around what the question is that I'm asking. But have you started to, because your mom is not totally blind yet, is that something that you guys have discussed at all?
A little bit, yes. And your observation that each generation handles these things differently is really apt. My mom's not dealing with it, not directly. And I'm sort of trying to get out ahead of it as far and as fast as possible, so it doesn't overtake me, because the idea is so overwhelming. And if I'm like, all right, well, I'm 32, I'll go blind when I'm 82, so that gives me, it gives me 50 years to figure out how to deal with it. But everyone's different, right? Like just because my mom is like a keep calm and carry on person who who's processing it in her own way that's healthy for her. And so all I can do is honor her experience and support her in her process while engaging in mine.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
You guys have silenced, everyone's in thought, which is great, which is really great. And
right.
Glenn does mention there that 50 years from now, science being the way it is, maybe we'll have a cure for it.
They're working on it. I hope you're right.
That's that would be nice. That would be very nice. So with that, we will say good night. We thank everyone. Like I say, we'll have you back anytime you want to come back, and we appreciate it. We appreciate you guys shedding all your skin. That's the beauty of this. So thank you very much, and we'll see everybody later in April. We think we're gonna have another one at the last week of April, another projection. So stay tuned, and thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks everyone.